Next, I'd like to introduce Maria Santelli. Maria has been the director of the Center on Conscience and War since 2011. It's a 75-year-old organization that works to extend and defend the rights of conscientious objectors to war. She founded the New Mexico GI Rights Hotline, which provides direct services and resources to members of the military. And she's also a leading voice statewide on issues of military participation in war, including conscientious objection, military sexual violence, etc. So thank you, Maria, and we look forward to your talk.
Can I actually move this? I think I actually have to move this. Can I move this? Yeah. But you see my point, why I was trying to go ahead of John, right? Right? I really thought I was going to. Good afternoon. I was told it was necessary. I was brainwashed. As a U.S. Army chaplain, I watched on August 6th as the Enola Gay took off for Hiroshima, on August 9th when Boxcar took off for Nagasaki, and I said nothing. I knew hundreds of thousands of women and children would be vaporized and incinerated, and I said nothing. I was silent. We, all of us, must no longer be silent. Those are the words of Father George Zabelka, a Catholic chaplain and conscientious objector. Conscientious objectors, or COs, start, like Father Zabelka did, with what's in front of them, with what they're witnessing, what they're doing, what they're failing to do. And they start by recognizing that something is wrong. And then this prick to the conscience evolves into a realization that all war is wrong. Brian, a Navy officer, writes in his application for discharge as a conscientious objector, "As I graduated and became a winged aviator in an active war-fighting squadron, the reality dawned on me. It became more and more apparent that I could not, in good conscience, continue to aid the American war machine. I remember the distinct image of being at work and sitting in the room where nuclear weapons are launched and questioning why I was even there in the first place." Shortly after his realization, leaving behind a lifelong dream of being a Navy officer, Brian began the process of being discharged from the Navy as a conscientious objector. Father Zabelka blessed the atomic bomb crews who dropped the bombs on the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was a believer in just war theory because it was what his Catholic Church had taught for 1,700 years, and it was what his Catholic leadership in the Army continually reinforced. But it was his conscience that told him no war is just and all war is wrong. And it's the same message that each of us receives from our own conscience. It is true that the default position for humanity is that of conscientious objector to war. Embedded in the roots of violence and injustice is this misguided belief that humanity is predisposed to violence and war. In our work at the Center on Conscience and War, the stories of military conscientious objectors serve as daily reminders and individual case studies that prove that we are naturally predisposed to peace. Our conscience tells us cooperation with others is right, and injustice and violence against others is wrong. Remarkably, it may be the military who knows this better than those of us who are on the front lines of movements for justice and peace. So often I hear people throw up their hands, people who work for peace and justice, and say, the world is such a violent place, or people are so violent. I also hear things like, oh, I could never join the Army. I can't kill. Those people are different from me. They can kill. Well, the truth is they can't kill either, not without consequences. And I know this because I talk with them every day. I know this because I have seen the lengths that the military goes to try to make them into killers. Look at basic military training. This is a science. Killology really is a science. And it has been expressly designed to circumvent our natural moral judgment, our natural natural repulsion toward killing one another, and condition a soldier to kill reflexively by rote, without thinking and without filtering through the conscience. Training to kill requires constant reinforcement. If it was natural, it would come easy, right? And we would thrive. It would be good for us. But the hundreds of thousands of veterans struggling with the wounds of moral injury, wounds to the soul caused by a transgression against the conscience, are poignant proof of our tragic misunderstanding of our own nature. 18-year-old Zach from rural North Carolina wanted to be a soldier since he was a little boy. He didn't join because he wanted to take other human lives, but because he wanted to make something better of his own. When he arrived at basic training, it didn't take long for him to realize that the Army didn't care what he wanted. "They're trying to make me a killer," he told me, choking back tears. When he refused their training, he was physically and emotionally abused. And in his jail cell on Fort Benning, he looked down at his belt and up at the rafters. But thankfully, he didn't have to take that step. He found a way out. He found a way to follow his conscience, just as countless men and women have done throughout history. As long as there has been war, there have been conscientious objectors. The inevitability of violence and injustice is a myth that persists at the hands of a media and government who choose to strengthen their own influence and harden their own power by sowing fear and division among us, our communities. A perfect example of this is right in front of us. Among the horrible and unspeakably tragic stories coming out of Syria, there are also many that speak to the best angels of our nature. The one that fits here is one about the hundreds of thousands of young men who are choosing to leave their homes, not out of fear for their own lives, but for fear that they will be conscripted to take the lives of others. These young men are conscientious objectors, and we should call them that instead of letting the dominant narrative write their story for them and us. The media tells us that the image of thousands of young men coming from the Middle East to the West should frighten us, that these refugees are coming not to flee violence, but somehow to bring it with them. But the stories of these young men, these soldiers of conscience, tell a different tale. They're coming to the West not to hurt us, but so they don't have to hurt anyone. One man in Turkey who has been aiding Syrian refugees puts it this way: young men have to decide before they reach military age, either leave or learn to kill. Surely it is better to leave, he asks. The simple and scientific truth is that morality against war and violence is inherent in who we are. Consistently, we actively choose cooperation and kindness, and by default, it is our common practice to reject competition and conflict. Don't believe me? Look around. I am privileged to witness conscience in action every day, and I'm pleased to invite you to do the same. Chris Kennedy is here with us today. He's a soldier in the North Carolina National Guard, currently applying for discharge as a conscientious objector. And I'm going to give the rest of my time for you to hear about his own personal story, his evolution from soldier to soldier of conscience.